A foggy London morning, and a client steps into a small flat on Baker Street. Before the visitor has said a single word, the tall, sharp-eyed man across the room announces their profession, their recent journey, even the worry sitting on their mind, just by studying their clothes and their hands. The client is stunned, because they have not spoken yet. How could this man possibly know all that? The answer is simple. He is the most famous detective in the world. His name is Sherlock Holmes. Beside him sits an admiring friend, a doctor named Watson, and it is Watson who tells us these stories. This book gathers 12 separate mysteries: stolen jewels, missing people, strange clubs, and deadly secrets, all waiting to be untangled. Let's get into it. The author of these stories, Arthur Conan Doyle, was born in Edinburgh, Scotland in 1859. Doyle actually trained not as a writer, but as a physician, studying medicine at the University of Edinburgh. There, one of his professors, Joseph Bell, left a deep impression on him. Bell was a surgeon famous for his sharp powers of observation, capable of guessing a patient's profession and history just by studying their clothing, their hands, their walk, before they had even spoken. Small demonstrations that stuck with Doyle for years afterward. As a young doctor, Doyle's practice was slow to take off. He first opened a practice specializing in eye disorders, but patients were scarce, and in those empty hours, he began writing fiction. The first novel to feature Sherlock Holmes was A Study in Scarlet, published in 1887, followed by a second novel, The Sign of Four, in 1890. But the real breakthrough came when Holmes began appearing in short stories in the Strand magazine. Starting in 1891, these stories became so beloved that readers would line up to buy the latest issue. The book in front of us collects the first 12 of those stories and was published as a single volume in 1892. Interestingly, Doyle himself valued his historical novels far more highly, and at times regarded Holmes as little more than a diversion. Years later, this would lead him to grow tired of the character and attempt to remove him from his fiction altogether, though that is a story for another book. Doyle's life extended well beyond writing. In 1902, he was knighted for a pamphlet he wrote about the war in South Africa, and from then on was known as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. By the time he died in 1930, he had left behind a character both beloved and, at times, exhausting to his own creator, the most famous detective in the world. So, what actually happens across these 12 stories? Each one is a complete, self-contained tale, and together they introduce us to Holmes and Watson's rooms on Baker Street, their landlady, Mrs. Hudson, and the strangest possible clients who come knocking on their door. Watson narrates these stories himself, a former army doctor wounded in Afghanistan, and ever since he began sharing rooms with Holmes, he has made a habit of writing down his friends' adventures. In one story, a king seeks Holmes's help in recovering a compromising photograph tied to a past love affair, only to run into a woman whose intelligence catches even the great detective off guard. In another, a red-headed pawnbroker is recruited into a bizarre club purely because of his hair color, paid to copy out an encyclopedia by hand, until one day the club simply vanishes without a trace. In a third, a woman living in the countryside comes to Holmes in terror, fearing she will share the same mysterious fate as her sister, who died under strange circumstances. In yet another, a stolen jewel turns up inside a Christmas goose, sending Holmes down a chain of deductions that leads him to the most unexpected corners of London. Elsewhere, a respectable man vanishes into the city's worst streets, terrifying his wife, and sending Holmes chasing the trail of a hidden double life. A bride disappearing on her own wedding day presents yet another puzzle, one that threatens to become a full-blown scandal in front of her family and her intended husband. And in one of the most memorable stories, a young woman fears for her life in her own stepfather's country manor, convinced that something in the house itself means to harm her, a fear Holmes takes far more seriously than anyone around her does. What unites all these stories is Holmes's method, arriving at a scene and, before asking anyone a single question, examining a trace of dust on the carpet, a stain on someone's coat, the shape of a fingernail. Watson watches these methods with admiration, but rarely understands them himself, much like the reader. Holmes's answer is always the same, that truly seeing what is in front of you is something most people simply never learn to do. Clients across the whole book range from nobility to ordinary shopkeepers, but in every case, some overlooked detail turns out to hold the key to the entire mystery. We will not tell you who did it, why, or how, because the whole pleasure of this book lies in following those clues alongside Holmes, building your own theory in your head, and then watching how far Holmes's own reasoning outpaces it. What keeps these stories alive today is that detective fiction here is built almost like a science. Mysterious tales existed before Holmes, but Holmes solves cases not through intuition, but through systematic observation and logic, working almost like a scientist. That method became one of the seeds of an entire century of detective fiction, and it even influenced the real development of forensic science. The partnership between Holmes and Watson also created a lasting template, one cool and logical, the other warm and human, a pairing that countless detective duos since have followed. And these 12 stories left the genre something else just as lasting, a structural innovation, each story short enough to read in one sitting, yet complete enough to resolve an entire mystery from beginning to end. For readers used to long, serialized novels, this format was strikingly new, and it essentially set the template for short-form detective fiction going forward. The structure behind countless modern detective shows, solving a case within a single episode, traces back in large part to this very book. Holmes's magnifying glass, his habit of thinking through a pipe, and his rapid, precise deductions turned the character into one of the most recognizable figures in all of literature. There are some fascinating details behind this book as well. Holmes's stories appeared in the Strand magazine, alongside illustrations by an artist named Sidney Paget, and the elegant image we now associate with Holmes actually owes as much to Paget's drawings as to Doyle's own prose. Here's another curious fact. That famous line everyone associates with Holmes does not actually appear in exactly that form anywhere in these original stories. It entered popular memory later through stage and film adaptations. Today in London, a museum stands on Baker Street, bearing Holmes's fictional address, drawing fans from every corner of the world, even though no building with that actual number existed on Baker Street when Doyle was writing. Guinness World Records lists Sherlock Holmes as the most portrayed human literary character in film and television. Even Doyle himself never anticipated such a devoted following. The stories felt so real that many readers at the time wrote letters addressed directly to Holmes, asking the fictional detective to solve their own personal problems. Letters addressed to that imaginary flat on Baker Street never really stopped, and even today, that museum in London still receives mail from admirers around the world, as if Holmes were still living there. We have covered the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, but the only real way to solve these 12 mysteries is to follow Holmes's own reasoning, clue by clue, for yourself. This book is only one link in the Sherlock Holmes series, and you can find Holmes's earlier novels and later story collections on this channel as well. If you would like to listen to the complete book as an audiobook, you will find the link in the description. Subscribe for more books in this series. Until the next one, try looking at the world around you the way Holmes does. You might find you have been overlooking most of it all along.